Welcome back to China and the Hill, your essential weekly update on the U.S. China news and policy debates unfolding in Washington, D.C. and beyond. This week, we're breaking down the latest in U.S. China relations, from the Supreme Court's scrutiny of Trump's tariff powers to new findings on U.S. firms applying technology to China's surveillance network. Let's get into it. Before we jump into this week's new bills, the China and the Hill team is excited to launch a new tool for our listeners and readers. To help you follow all the congressional action on China, we've created the China and the Hill Legislation Database, a free, searchable resource that makes it easy to track every China-related bill and resolution. Filter by topic, sponsor, or status, and see how congressional engagement with China evolves over time. Check it out at ncuscr.org or find the link in this episode's description. This week on the Hill, several new China-related bills were introduced covering a range of issues. In the House, lawmakers introduced the Disrupt Act, directing the executive branch to form a coordinated strategy to counter growing cooperation among China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Meanwhile, two new bills from Senator Rick Scott seek to improve identification and tighten oversight of Chinese military companies operating in the United States, while a bill from Senator Alyssa Slotkin would establish a joint defense technology program with Taiwan to develop uncrewed and counter-uncrewed systems. Another measure would create interagency crisis simulations to test U.S. government coordination during major security events. In AI and technology security, a trio of bills aims to keep the U.S. ahead in the artificial intelligence race. The Securing Reliable Power for Advanced Technologies Act would fast-track defense-related AI infrastructure projects. The GAIN AI Act would ensure U.S. buyers have priority access to advanced AI chips before export to countries of concern. And a bipartisan Senate resolution reaffirms the importance of maintaining American dominance in AI innovation. Two new Senate measures target the drug crisis. The Detect Nitazines Act calls for expanding DHS and DEA capabilities to detect and disrupt emerging synthetic opioids, while the Amendment of Fentanyl Sanctions Act would extend the act to address counterfeit and copycat drugs. Several bills address foreign interference in U.S. systems. The Restricting Foreign Contributions Act tightens limits on foreign money in elections. The Foreign Advertisement Disclosure Act would require clear labeling on ads paid for by foreign governments. And the Foreign Remittance Accountability Act orders an investigation into foreign programs enabling U.S. tax evasion. Both chambers introduced bills to restore normal trade relations with key Central Asian partners, while another proposal calls for increasing domestic procurement of critical minerals to reduce reliance on China. First, turning to tariff news. The Supreme Court signaled skepticism last week over whether President Trump has the legal authority to impose sweeping tariffs on imports from nearly all countries, raising the possibility that the justices could strike down or sharply limit the administration's signature economic policy. While liberal justices were expected to be critical of the tariffs, several of the court's conservatives joined them in sharply questioning an attorney for the Trump administration during more than 2.5 hours of arguments. Justice Neil Gorsuch noted the implications of granting the president tariff authority with few bounds. He noted the Constitution assigns Congress the power to levy taxes, appearing wary of such a dramatic expansion of the power of the chief executive. President Trump could use other laws to reimpose some of his tariffs if he loses the current case, a point that some of the justices noted. Most of those laws, however, impose procedural and substantive requirements that don't allow for the sort of wide-ranging power the president has claimed the international emergency law gives him. Turning abroad, the United States and China are easing some trade tensions following high-level talks. Washington is preparing to finalize a 1-year suspension of port fees and maritime tariffs targeting China, a key part of the trade truce reached between Presidents Trump and Xi during their meeting in Busan last month. The U.S. Trade Representative says the pause will also apply to planned tariffs on port cranes. In response, China announced that it will lift retaliatory tariffs on several American agricultural products, including soybeans, corn, wheat, sorghum, and chicken. Beijing also plans to remove 15 U.S. companies from its export control list and drop 10 others from its unreliable entity list. China has also moved to address another major U.S. concern, the export of fentanyl precursor chemicals. This week, China's Ministry of Commerce and 4 other government agencies added 13 chemicals to a list requiring export licenses for shipments to the United States, Mexico, and Canada. The new restrictions come shortly after FBI Director Kash Patel's visit to Beijing for talks with Chinese officials. Turning to domestic news, an Associated Press investigation has found that across 5 Republican and Democratic administrations, the U.S. government has repeatedly allowed, and at times even helped, American firms sell technology to Chinese police, government agencies, and surveillance companies. Meanwhile, U.S. lawmakers have struggled to close a growing loophole that allows China to access powerful American AI chips despite export bans by renting them through U.S. cloud service providers. Since last September, Congress has tried 4 times to tighten those restrictions, but each attempt has failed after heavy lobbying from more than 100 tech industry representatives, according to disclosure reports. Some politicians on both sides of the aisle blame the failures in part on the money and influence of large technology companies. An Associated Press analysis of lobbying filings showed U.S. tech and telecom companies, as well as their trade associations, spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 2 decades on lobbyists who listed key bills impacting China-related trade on their quarterly disclosure reports, among other issues. In other news, the Federal Communications Commission has unanimously voted to tighten restrictions on tech companies deemed national security threats, including several from China. The new rule bars the FCC from authorizing the import or sale of new telecom equipment using parts from firms on its covered list, which includes Huawei, ZTE, China Mobile, and China Telecom. This decision also allows the agency to ban previously approved equipment in certain cases. FCC Chair Brendan Carr says the move closes loopholes that could allow foreign adversaries to exploit vulnerabilities in U.S. networks. As part of the crackdown, major U.S. online retailers have already begun removing millions of listings for Chinese-made electronics, such as smartwatches and home security cameras. And in our last story for today, several U.S. states, including Nebraska, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas, have passed a series of state-level foreign influence laws aimed at countering Chinese involvement in state affairs. Nebraska's law, for example, requires individuals, businesses, and organizations linked to countries designated as foreign adversaries, such as China or Russia, to register with the state government. Nebraska's measure expands on the Federal Foreign Agents Registration Act to cover entities like universities and nonprofits that were previously exempt. Violations could lead to fines of up to $50,000 or even deportation. 2 opaque advocacy groups, State Shield and State Armor, have been key advocates for these laws, appearing in multiple state legislatures across the country to advocate for broader foreign agent registries. Critics warn that the measures risk stifling free speech and legitimate business activity, comparing the wave of anti-China legislation to a modern-day Red Scare. And that's all for this week's edition of China on the Hill. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our Substack for the latest updates, full transcripts, and bonus content. Link in the description. For more from the National Committee, check out our other podcast episodes wherever you listen, or visit our YouTube channel for in-depth discussions, interviews, and analysis. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.